Hey everybody, this is Alan Walls Photography. It is Saturday, September the 10th, and as promised, today we have a special guest. Today I am joined by Chris Field. Chris Field is a pioneering photographer in the area of motion control, time-lapse macro photography. Not many people are doing this stuff, and in my opinion, nobody's doing it as well as he is. I suggested some time ago that you guys watch the television series Green Planet, the BBC documentary with David Attenborough. Much of the filming in that series was done by Chris or done with robots built by Chris. This guy has a fascinating story, and I want you to hear it. I have been looking forward to this conversation for a long time, so it is my honor and privilege to introduce to you Mr. Chris Field. Chris, you made it.
Yes, I did. Thank you very much for having me on. I've really been looking forward to this.
Fantastic. Well, we've been really looking forward to having you. What are you working on now? You been busy?
Yeah, actually, I've been busy with a couple different things. I've got a kind of a long ongoing project with a reforestation company called Drone Seed that's been a lot of work, and that's been a real fun project. Been doing that for over about a year now. And then I've also got some new equipment that I'm tying into Unreal Engine, which is a virtual effects engine used to like build video games and make movies and stuff like that. Right. So it's very similar to the same tech used on the Mandalorian series and on some of the Marvel movies and newer movies, where you have a big virtual stage that's all LED walls that wrap around it. Yeah. Then as the camera moves around, those walls react to the camera to always show the correct perspective, angle, and skew of what it should see. And I've been doing that on a much smaller scale. And last night I actually filmed it's not a really interesting time lapse, but it was just to test and see if it would work. It's just a big ice skull melting, and it's in an area where it looks like it's in the desert. Of course, it's not. It's in my studio, but it actually worked really well. And I still got a little bit of tweaking and effort to dial it in to get it just perfect. But right out the gate, first test of actually doing a time lapse with it, it went really nice. So it's something I'm really excited about.
Well, we're going to be excited to see that too. That sounds amazing. We've been working on a bit of photogrammetry as well at the macro scale, but we're going to talk about that later. I don't want us to get ahead of ourselves. People are going to want to know how in the world you got into this technical photography, time-lapse photography, videography. I mean, how do you get into something so esoteric and cool?
It's a little bit of a longer story, or at least it's a long timeline with very many uneventful periods. But over time, it kind of got me to where I was. I had about 20 years worth of career in telecommunications. I was in there, I was doing a technical level, some engineering work, and then eventually into management. And that was pretty much, it was the world I lived in professionally, and I was quite comfortable with. And one thing that was nice about it is it provided me a little bit of a budget to buy some equipment and stuff like that when I wanted to. Now, when I first started, though, I was going through a divorce and I had very little money, and I got a bonus from work, and I decided, with this like $500, I'm going to spend on myself. And I got a camera, an old Nikon D40, and just absolutely fell in love with photography from that moment on. And I was always interested in seeing what else there could be done. I kind of like to just experiment around quite a bit, and I learned that I can actually take pictures of nebulas and star clusters and things like that here from Earth. I really thought you had to have a really big telescope to do that. Turns out you just need a decent zoom lens, and you need something that'll help kind of compensate for the rotation of the Earth. and that was my first entrance into motion control.
I've tried that, and the results are just miserable,
Oh,
depressing.
mine were too.
But did you right out of the gate? Did you build your own tracking system and
Yes. I mean, at first I was just using a nice wide angle lens because you can get about up to 30 seconds exposure with something about like 12 millimeter, and you can get the whole Milky Way in there. But if you really want to get in on those things, when you start zooming in, the rotation of the Earth is so much that everything turns into stars, pills, and lines very quickly. So I found a system called an AstroTrack. I don't even know if they still make them anymore, but it was about $800, and it was this two pieces of aluminum that used like a lead screw through there to like kind of twist and pivot themselves to kind of move with the rotation of the planet. The problem is it was about $800, and I didn't have any money to afford it. But I did see this guy online had put out plans for what's called a barn door tracker. And it's basically two pieces of wood on a hinge. Well, mine was wood. People make them a lot nicer than I did, but basically it's two planes on a piece of wood, and the camera is attached to one of those planes on a ball head or whatever kind of mount you want, and then you align that hinge up with Polaris, so the North Star, but not quite on. You want to be just a little bit down and to the left, I think, or maybe it's down the right. It's been a long time, but if you mount a laser and you get it like dead on with it, you can actually point it up there and get it pretty much where you need. And then I just had to build a little motor system that would turn a gear or a nut that would push a curved screw in order to get it to do that opening movement. And it did not work terribly well. I got maybe about an extra 20-30% worth of exposure time before I started having problems with it. In the meantime, I had a friend named Kyle, or he was an acquaintance at the time, and he saw what I was trying to do. And he's kind of like one of those garage engineer guys, you know, he's always building different things, doesn't have any formal training on it, but if you need something made, he's one of those guys you just know, go to Kyle. He knows how to make anything. He can do anything. So he ended up helping me out, and I just fell in love with the whole process of how you design things and how you build things and how you can create a tool that you never had before. So he helped me out, and I got a barn door tracker that was much nicer.
A big part of your story, a big part of what's so fascinating about what you're doing is this technical piece, is the ability to just make what it is you need to get the effects that you want to get, which raises two questions. Do you have formal training or education in designing systems and prototyping and the using the mill and all that type of thing? And secondly, do you have formal training in cinematography or in filmmaking to be able to put these skills to use?
Well, to sum it up short, no. I don't have any formal training in anything that I'm doing. Yeah. No, it was just kind of a process. It was just kind of a falling in love with it kind of thing. You know, when my friend Kyle was helping me make that tracker, I ended up stumbling across a time-lapse video online, and it showed those stars going across, and it was the interest in the tracker that led like the algorithms to bringing me over to that kind of stuff. And when I saw it, I fell in love with it, but I didn't know how to do anything. But Kyle and we started working together, and I learned quite a bit from him. I learned the basics of like 3D design, learned how to do machining work, how to use I've got a small TAG micro mill that I can use to like cut out metal parts that I need. You know, he kind of showed me a bit about 3D printing. So if I need to, I've got some pretty good printers these days. I can print in like polycarbonate and nylon and things like that to make the parts that I need. But I've always had this huge interest in mechanics and making things happen, making things work. When I was a kid, I remember I used to get a little wind-up toy or something, and a while later my mom would find it, and it's opened up, and all the gears and everything are out everywhere, and I figured I could probably put it back together. Sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't, but I always had this fascination. And, you know, as a little kid, thinking as a little kid, it's like, look, I got all these cool gears, I got these little motors, I'm going to build a robot, you know, and that was, you know, a big goal of mine.
I did the same with my dad's cine camera when I was 8. And I couldn't get it back together. There were far too many pieces.
Yeah, a wind-up toy is one thing, but a cinema camera.
Wind-up cinema camera, yeah. It was, That's a story I won't soon forget. My goodness. I do the same thing. I mean, I take stuff apart just to see how it works, and then use what I find to build something later that also doesn't work. But
Yeah, it's it, it's fun to be able to create something like that. You know, put something together and actually have it serve the purpose that you want. When I first started getting into time-lapse photography, there were only a couple systems on the market that you could move the camera with, you know, on like that slider. And you know, this was not long after I got my camera. I was still, you know, in the middle of divorce land, so I had like no money to me. I couldn't afford to buy one, but you know, I could afford to build one. And then, you know, we started building these things and started selling them all over the world. It was really kind of neat, but we never made enough out of it to replace my income. And eventually I got kind of burned out on building these things.
You were doing them one at a time?
Yeah. So I really love building new things. I love creating new things. Manufacturing, on the other hand, is a little bit less interesting to me. You know, I kind of prefer something where I'm building something brand new. If I'm making the same thing 100 times, I get pretty bored with it. But, you know, it was that I had this equipment, and then it was cold because it was wintertime in Colorado, and everything outside was kind of dead and gray, and I didn't feel like hiking this time-lapse rig up into the mountains. So I ended up taking it down into a spare room in my basement, and I turned it onto a flower. And it was a purple hyacinth, and that was pretty much one of those defining moments in my life where it just it completely changed the direction in which I was going to go. Started filming plants. Not a lot of people were doing that. It's a really visually appealing subject. And then I started getting some notice for some production companies, and then worked a couple different productions. And then probably about 5 years ago, or maybe four and a half years ago, BBC, they caught wind of what I was doing, and they were starting to get ready to film for Green Planet. And then they ended up making me a really nice offer, and I made my exit from telecommunications. And now this has been my full-time job for probably about close to 5 years. But no formal education at all, none. And if you look at my success versus failure rate, it absolutely shows that. Because for every success I have, it's just that little tiny little white capped peak on the top of a mountain of failures.
Exactly, but we don't have to write that down in the credits. It can just it can just be a success. Well, I must say that the Green Planet was. I've seen your videos before. I was in the market for a printer, and I've seen several of your 3D printing videos. So I knew who you were, but I didn't make the connection. And when Mike called me, Mike Canford's one of my good friends out in Hollywood, he called me and said, "There's a program on television you've got to see. It's crazy. The shots in this don't make any sense. They've done time lapse of growing plants, and the camera stays with it all the time. How's that even possible?" So I watched it, and I agreed with him. Yeah, it was impossible. I just said it. You know, it's computer graphics. Well, it wasn't. It was you. And how in the world did you come up with, first of all, the idea of tracking a growing plant, and not a growing plant, but a moving vine as it bobs around in the underbrush? How did you even think that was something that could be done?
Because I knew more about mechanics and robotics than plants is really what it came down to. There are some plants that, you know, you can kind of, you get to learn them and you can kind of predict them what they're going to do, but there's some that don't. There's a clip of mine that is one of the ones that got the attention of the BBC, and it's a plant called an Appenthus, also known as a pitcher plant. And they've got these long leaves that come out, and then there's this pitcher that forms in there, and it fills up with this fluid, and it's a fall trap. Bugs will go up there because there's like this sweet nectar that's on the top of the lid, and trying to get in there, they'll fall into it. And they've got some enzymes that are down in there that digest these bugs over time, and the plant, that's how it gets its nutrients, because it's in an incredibly nutrient poor soils where it grows up. And you know, if you have a Venus flytrap, you can predict pretty well how it's going to come out, because you see the head, you see where it's facing, where it's folded over, and you know it's going to reach up and back and then open and pop. But that Nepenthes, it's coming out. It's anybody's game as to where it's going to land that trap. So if I was going to be able to film it, I was actually going to need to be able to, either predict what it's going to do, which I was not very good at. And with a lot of plants, they tend to surprise you with the way they're going to behave. And if they surprise you and you have this motion script that you've written out in order to film this thing, and it just grows an inch closer than you thought it was, well, now it's out of focus and the footage is ruined. You can sit there with the camera and go in like on a regular timer and make a very slight adjustment to the focus and see if you can correct for that. But if anything else, there's really not much you can do. You just have to pretty much start it over. So I had been learning about this program. It's a stop motion animation software package from it's called Dragon Frame. And when I was looking through it, I downloaded the demo version, I started playing around with it. How could I integrate this with a robot? I've seen other people do this. They build robot, then they buy Dragon Frame, and then ta-da! But nobody seems to explain the in between. You know, it's like here's the plan, get this, and the answer, and the solution at the end is big profit. Well, what's in the middle? So I had to sort that out. But in the process of it, I realized that this is a system that could position itself so accurately. And my timing was so long, waiting 10, 15, 20 minutes, even sometimes 2 or 3 hours between taking an image, that the camera's sitting there. I could go in there and I could see, all right, this plant is growing a little bit further away from the camera than I thought. The focus is a little bit off. How do I want to go about this? Do I want to just correct the focus? Do I want to reposition the camera? So what I would do is I would look at the motion script I'd already built out, and where I was at, I would lock in keyframes, meaning it will remember the exact point it's currently at. Then I'd move the camera out to where it would be, say, 2 or 3 days from then. And I'd look and check and see, well, where does the focus at that point look like where the plant's at? And if it wasn't there, I'd make that modification right there. And then when I brought everything back to the point where it started, it would follow that new path. And it would actually, and I could use that to chase plants. So in that case of that Appenthus, not only was I able to chase this tendril coming out, but I was also able to go around it, because when the picture opens up, it doesn't open up in the same position. You don't know if it's going to be aiming towards the plant, away from the plant, or to the side. You just don't know. So it was really quite awesome to be able to do that and track this thing over the course of, I think, 40-something days as this grew and developed. It's still one of my favorite shots, if it's not the best set work and stuff like that I had done. From a technical standpoint, it was a really fun shoot to do.
How much of that was involved you personally being at the camera, and how much of it was completely automated?
There's no automated tracking of the subject. So that is all 100% me. But the actual time of me being involved, if it might take me about 4 or 5 minutes to make a correction that's going to fix what's currently happening, because I know that maybe in a couple days, this is where it's going to go. It's not going to go here.
Were you monitoring it remotely?
Sometimes it depends. When I did that particular shot, it was just in my basement, and I just go down there and check it a few times a day to make sure it was looking good, that the water pumps were working right, the lighting systems were working right, and everything was going well. Like I said, there's no actual automation portion of that, but what you can do is you can tailor and alter the program on the fly, which is something that no other system that I'd seen has the ability to do. I think there's maybe another system that can, but none of the motion control kits, none of the robots that you can buy from the manufacturers have that capability, unless it can actually interface with Dragon Frame. And there's quite a few of them that can now. It actually links directly up, and you can do the same trick.
Fantastic. Well, we would love, I don't know if you're going to have time to do this, but I think everybody would love to see what that part of the studio looks like.
So yeah, needless to say that this is definitely my happy spot, and where you see me right here, this is the workshop. You know, if you want, you want to take I can happy to take you around and kind of show you what I got here.
Oh, please do. We'd love to see it.
This is my happy place. This is my workshop. This is where I go to build all of my robots, where I go to make all my tools, timing systems, where I design and do all of my design and engineering. Let's take a little look here. So let's start over here real quick. These are two of my 3D printers, both from Kitty Tech. I really like this company. The iMate, this is a nice little printer for non-demanding jobs. It does a very good job. Here is the one from 2018. This is an older Kitty Tech 1, and this thing has been super reliable and just cranked out part after part for me. And then right beneath them, this is my plasma table. So I have a plasma cutter over here and a line dryer and this computer, and it runs Mach 3, and it runs this table. So it basically works like a frickin' lightsaber, and it cuts all these parts out that I needed to blast out. And it's so nice. It just goes so fast. A part like this can probably be done in about 20 seconds. So this is definitely one of my favorite tools to use. And what I love about it is the compact size, because I don't have a huge workshop and I don't have a need for a large cutting bed. So this is enough that I can take about a 24 by 36 inch sheet and throw it on top of it and just get all kinds of cutting done. Over here, yeah, this is the plasma machine itself, and this is the line dryer. Then over here, we have got my mill. This is from a company called TAG. This is a micro mill. I can use it to manufacture small parts. I don't use it nearly as much as I used to, but it still is a very good system, and this is also controlled off the same computer. Then over here, we got various hydroponic supplies, powder coating equipment. We have wrenches and sockets. And like I said, this area over here is always kind of a mess, but I use this for germinating seeds quite a bit. I got a lot of little trees, like hydroponically grown trees. These have just been grown in the cracking method. And then here's some more trees that are growing. So I'm growing a lot of trees these days. Speaking of trees, have you ever wondered how they managed to get those mushrooms to grow out of a tree on demand? Well, this is how. A little inside trick. So this is a 4-inch PVC. This is a mycelium block of lion's mane. And all I got to do is I got to cut a hole in it and start misting it, and it's going to start growing mushrooms wherever I want. So what I do is I take this and I wrap it in this rubber bark, and this stuff really looks good on camera. So I can wrap this thing up in bark, and it looks just like a tree trunk. And then I have a little hole in the bark. And sorry, I'm moving the camera around way too much, I think. And the mushrooms will erupt and grow through that hole, and I'll get a big lion's mane knob just coming right out of it. I've got another one of these blocks that should be delivered today, and this one here. And these are going to be going out into the studio for the on that Unreal virtual effects stage. Moving along, I've got these workbenches that go all the way along, and this is where I put. This is where I put all my tools, stuff for measuring and marking, hammers and chisels. I try to do my best to have plenty of storage room for everything. These are some of the long-term capture rigs that I build. These two are still being worked on. This one has just been completed. Soon it's going to be going up over here with the rest of them. This is my loft. There's just space up there I use for storage for various things. Parts, tanks, equipment, larger tools, stuff like that. And then over here, this is my soldering station. And this is where I do put all my circuit boards together. Kind of like this is one of the controller circuits for the long-term capture rigs. Here's a parts bin. I printed this. I'm really pleased with how it came out. I absolutely love these parts bins. And it took quite a while, but I keep printing out more of these every time I can. And that just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Over here, I've got soldering equipment, as you can see. Here's my wash and cure for my printer. This is a resin printer, and I use that to make lids and for my enclosures because it does a nicer job than the FDM printers. This is my Chitty-Tech iFast. This thing is amazing. I do a lot of printing with this. For example, these are the lens barrel mounts that I use on my time-lapse rigs. Print those in there. I can do multiple filaments, and this is even capable of printing in nylon and carbon fiber, and it actually does a fantastic job with each. And of course, you got your shop brake in order to bend metal, drill press. Here's the belt sander. And then over here, this is my powder coating oven that I created. I just took this master-built smoker, popped all the rivets, and stuffed a bunch of insulation throughout it. And I just cranked this thing, fill it with parts, crank it up to 500 for a few minutes, or 400 for a few minutes, and let it cool down, and it's all done. Right next to that, you'll see we got one of my Blackmagic cameras over here, and this is my welding table. I do a lot of work on this table, but this is also where I do all of my filming for my YouTube show.
I'm a macro photographer, and I understand the difficulty of getting these close-up shots of plants or animals when you can't get the whole thing in focus. It's kind of what we do is focus stack. How do you deal with these small subjects? I know you also are a macro photographer. You can't do time lapse and focus stack, or can you?
Yeah, actually you can. You can't quite do video in focus stack, at least not real time video, but there is kind of a way around that if you have more time. The way that I normally go about it, so once again, the software package that I used in order to control my robots, it has this ability called indexing. And what that means is you can use it for a lot of different things. There's a lot of stuff you can do with this, but what I use it for is if I have all the different axes for my robots, right? So I have X, Y, and Z for the left, right, forward, backwards, up, and down, and then I'll have pan tilt and then a lens motor. And generally, I've got a couple extra ports I can use for prop pullers or if I want to move a light through a sequence or something. But what I can do is I can give them extra anchor mounts and link those to specific exposures. So if I wanted to film a plant and I wanted to hit it from an angle here and an angle here, and then I wanted a motion angle shot that was kind of ran through it, I could program it to do all three of those. And what it will do is I'll take frame one of exposure one, then frame one of exposure two, and then frame one of exposure three, and it will move to each location. So it'll like collect one here, then here, and then here, and it'll go back to the first one. So in between every single one of my frames that I'm filming, the camera's normally repositioning itself from 2 to 10 times, capturing it from as many different angles as possible. Well, I can do the same thing with the focus and just do it on only the focus and not the rest of the motion. So the camera's following a certain guided path, and after the amount of time that it takes in order for the next interval to come up, it'll shoot the first one, and then it'll adjust the focus and shoot it again, and adjust the focus again and shoot it again, and I can repeat it all the way up to I think about 50 times is the highest, but you run into some issues. Like I know that some of the shots that you're going to be doing, you're going to be working with hundreds of images just to create one single one. So it is a little bit more limited when you're doing this kind of video work or time lapse work, because if I might not necessarily have time to take 50 images. I was filming sundews for Green Planet, and that's a little sticky plant that's got these little sticky leaves and little like hairs on there. And as a bug lands on it, they'll curl in and wrap around and kind of roll it in. Those plants will grow and move fast enough that focus stacking is very tough. You're lucky if you can get about 10 frames before it's already moved enough that you're not going to be able to stack it anymore, because everything is shifted too much. So with those, what I'll try to do is get as much depth of field as possible, spread those stacks out, the individual images out as far as I can to have as little overlapping as possible that's in focus. And I might be able to take, something that might be 2 millimeters and expand that out to like, maybe about a centimeter worth of front to back. Other subjects, depending, like I was filming dung beetle seeds, they're not really, it's a type of seed for a tree that looks just like dung beetle poop. And the dung beetles that go out and they'll turn around, they'll put their back legs up on it, and they'll roll it into their holes, and they see these seeds, and they think these seeds are poop. So they want to go get them. So one of the shots they wanted me to do for Green Planet that didn't make it in the cut was filming it at such a high macro level that you see all the detail and surface over it, but it's vast, it's big, it looks like a landscape. And with that, I was doing focus stacking, I think maybe about 20 images across that dung beetle poop or seed in order to get it to look as large and expansive as possible. And the interesting thing is it's got these little ridges. It almost looks like a desert that has been rained on, and then give it a week of really hot, dry weather to just crack all that mud. It was really kind of cool. But on some subjects that don't move, you can definitely do quite a bit more.
Do you script that in? I mean, do you write the code for the whole process? Like if you run out of time on a stack, does it override the stack to make the move, or do you have to have every single step figured out ahead of time?
It will push the interval out if it has to.
Okay.
So it will not stop the stack. So it's something that you really kind of have to balance what your priorities of getting it are. In the case of like the sundews, I try to get about 10 images across and then put those together. But the problem is by the time it went from the last of the first frame, the last of the image is captured for the first frame, to the first of the second set, a lot of times things had already moved enough to where it gets difficult to stack it. So you got to do it as fast as you can, but there's definitely a limit to the speed that you can do. And no, I didn't write the code for it or anything, but if I say I'm going to have try to do 30 stacks, 30 images in a row, and then it's going to move over to the next one, and I say I'm going to have a 10-second interval, it's going to get all 30 of those images and immediately move, and then start on the next stack, and immediately start on the next stack. So it will take time to go through all of those. So that has to be something that you pay attention to. You have to limit the number of images it's going to take based off how much time it takes you to collect those images.
Do you have the flexibility to change the aperture between individual shots automatically? I mean, if you anticipate things are going to speed up.
That can certainly be done. I haven't done it, but if you're using a cinema lens with like a declicked aperture and you have a focus motor on it, you can index that just as well as you can index anything else. In fact, there's other times though where I'll be doing this this kind of stacking, and rather than actually adjusting the focus, I'll find sometimes I prefer just to move the camera forwards and then bring it back very slightly, a little bit at a time, in order to get those images.
Are you using the camera's built-in focus stepping software or focus stepping hardware, or this is your own?
No, this is all just programmed in and using the mechanics of the robots that I built to achieve it. So basically, I'm just taking a motor and I'm telling it, I want it to move, and then take an image, move, take an image, move, take an image, and go through all of these. Then I want all the motors to move to reposition the camera, and then it just starts going through that focus motor again.
You never considered using the built-in focus stacking programs?
I haven't used any of those. I don't have a very wide range of cameras, and the ones that I use, well, actually I do have a wide range of cameras, but not that I use for this kind of work. None of the ones that I have actually have that built in. Now I have seen, I believe it's Olympus has some of that. Nikon does, and I think it works pretty quick, right?
It works well. It just doesn't work at small enough increments to be very useful for serious macro. Well, the smallest increments are pretty big, like 300 microns or something.
Yeah, with my robots and the things and the systems that I build, my focus systems that I use on there, it's almost there's almost no limit to how fine I can actually get that control. I keep everything geared up enough to where there's a very high degree of accuracy of positioning and stuff. So I'm not sure what the actual rotation limit is, the way that I have it set, but I know like the very first time-lapse slider I built, I was able to reliably make it move 1/32 thousandths of an inch. So it really depends on what you're going to be using for the gearing mechanism and how you go about it mechanically to determine what is the actual theoretical limit of how fine it can get. But I had looked into the idea of using like cameras that had that, because I had a friend that had an Olympus, and I believe it had that. And if I understood right, it wrapped those images out in a burst. So it was like, and then it got it and it would have to sit there and process it. I suppose there's no reason that wouldn't work well too, especially if it gives you the output. You can save yourself the hassle of going through using one of the focus stacking programs, but at the same time, that benefit of speed and decreased effort on your side might also end up limiting the overall performance of how it is.
You were telling me that a lot of the stuff you were doing with the plant time-lapse stuff for Green Planet and for other projects, you were doing right there at your studio?
Yeah.
Is there any way we can see some of that where you do your filming?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. I've got a few shoots going on right now, and I'd be kind of happy to show you, give an idea of how that works, and show you the different robots and everything. By all means, so let's take a look.
Yeah, robots, let's go.
All right, so let's take a little trip through the studio. So I know a lot of studios out there are nice and super clean and everything's organized. This place is chaos, but I'm always having to like rip plants apart and like growing things and cultivating things, and sometimes things escape, and you never exactly know what's going to go on, and it's a very, very messy job. So it's not quite as nice as what you might see in a lot of studios, but let's go ahead and take a look around here. I'm going to flip you around. Okay, up here, this is Dan. This is the larger of my two gantry systems. So you got a camera on a pan tilt that hangs down from an XYZ axis, and then I've also got a secondary camera down here. And what I'm doing right now is I'm just filming pretty much nothing. This leaf is coming out, and I'm filming this leaf right here in front. And then I'm also filming these two leaves that are forming right there. It's not for a client or anything. It's just sometimes I like to park my cameras in strange places and just kind of watch and observe and see what happens. Sometimes you can get some pretty good footage. But yeah, so this is Dan, one of my larger robots. Then over here, we've got my towers. This one right here is Baby, and this one over here is Gomez. Right now, Baby is shooting footage for a company called Drone Seed, and I can't really show you what it's shooting, but it's I can kind of describe it a bit. They're these vessels that are used to deploy seeds in remote locations via drone, and I'm filming the interaction of the pucks with the water and the seeds and all that. And you can see here there's a crossbar that goes across, and there's an arm that sticks out on that with a pan tilt on the end, and that entire thing can go back and forth, so it can move the whole arm back and forth, and then that entire assembly can go up and down. And as you see, the bottom of this thing is on tracks, so the whole tower can slide in and out, and it can actually slide in and out with remarkable precision. So those are my two towers. This one over here is just filming some seeds behind some glass, and I don't want to disrupt it. Over here, this is another little station I set up. This is a fogponics shooting station. Oh, let's get to in frame. Basically, this thing fills up with nutrient-rich fog, and there is a little tree here. See that guy? Hey, little tree. So he's got his little roots hanging down in here, and the fog gives them nutrients and keeps them nice and moist so they don't dry out, and you can film the growth of the roots. So before this wants to take an image, these two fans will kick on. They're angled in towards the glass, so they clear the glass of any water and drops. And then the lights will fill on, and the foggers will turn off, and this entire thing will evacuate all the fog. It'll take an image, and then it fills it all itself right back up full of fog. So these are this is kind of an example of some of the things I have to build in order to pull off some of these shoots. Around over here, I have got a Kessler Cineshooter system, and right now it's filming this itty bitty little seed that's sticking its little root out. So I'm trying to film that, and if you look at the set, the entire set is on a turntable, and that's that Laowa 24 millimeter lens, and the seed's tucked in there nice and deep. And then over here, this is a heater that's been tucked in. It's a 12-volt heating pad in order to keep the temperature warm so the seed continues to germinate. So hopefully we'll get to see this guy pop his little root out here pretty soon. So it's just a little small spot that I have over here and over here. So I try to make the most out of my studio. Over here, this is Otto. This is my other gantry system. This is the first one that I had ever built, and this one is very robust, and I really like it. And what I'm shooting right here, this is a burn set, so it's supposed to look like a burn area. This is quite a wide lens to use on this, so it's going to look a little bit, you're going to see the backdrop a little bit easier with it. But normally I'm shooting about 35 millimeters, so it keeps it a little bit closer in so you can see all the other stuff. And I'm running various hydroponic watering systems inside here in order to provide some growth areas within the set for the trees to grow and take root. And then over here, this is my newest setup, and right now this is in use and I am filming. What we have here is a kit from a company called Axibo, and I have it tied in with Unreal Engine, and it creates this virtual backdrop. Now you see there's that little window right in there inside of it. That's the only thing the camera can see. It only presents that image to the camera. And the reason is that they can put a larger image out to the rest of the people that are acting on the set, and they're not getting seasick as the camera is moving around, because as the camera moves around, that window will move to match the location of the camera, and it will even warp and skew as it hits angles in order to present the correct image. And then when the camera is sliding back and forth, it creates parallax. So this is my second shoot. I've got a little skull there that's melting. I got a couple desert elements that are put in here. And maybe I can get and kind of see the scene that is filming. And the cool thing is I'm actually getting time lapse of the clouds too, because if you see those clouds, they are moving. So this is pretty cool. Anyway, so this is my humble studio, packed full of robots, and I try to use as much of the space as I possibly can. I wish I had twice the space, but you know, this is what I got, and I seem to do pretty well with it.
That is really exciting stuff. I know that Mike wanted to know, how do you handle the volume of data that a shot like this will accumulate?
Oh, man, it's so much. It's so much. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, compared to other people that are working in cinematography stuff, especially if people are using like a Phantom Flex camera, you know, or if somebody's using like, you know, like a digital red camera, the output of those is so big. Like I've got a couple Blackmagic Pocket Cinema cameras, and their 6K Blackmagic RAW recordings are just absolutely huge. You know, with time lapse, it also becomes another beast on its own, especially when you're getting a lot of smaller files that it has to go through and write versus larger ones. I think you hit higher speed writing larger ones than tons of little ones. But yeah, I've got on my PC, you know, I've got probably about 20 terabytes worth of space on there. I've got some that are NVMe drives, and those are the ones that I'll load all my footage on, and that's kind of like my sandbox that I'm playing with at the moment. Then I have other storage drives that I put stuff that I plan to be working on soon, and those might just be like 8 terabyte hard disk drives, you know, and then I've also got just a ton of external drives that are just packed with footage over the years that have built up. But it does get to be a much. It got to the point where I really started to appreciate the ability of having solid state portable drives that, you know, so you're not stuck with that 30 meg write speed when you have like 3 terabytes worth of data you got to dump. And if you think about when I'm shooting, especially if I'm doing a macro focus stacking, you have I'm shooting with a Canon camera with the CR2 RAW format, 24 megapixels. So they're good sized images. But if I'm going to do 600 images and I'm focus stacking them and I'm doing 10 on each, that becomes 6,000 images that I have to wrangle. So it definitely gets to be a lot. And I try to use as much batch processing and automation as I can. I've used a lot of programs that I'll use to like sync files and stuff like that. So each one of my robots has its own laptop dedicated to run it. So on that robot in particular, you know, I know that I'm going to be pulling all the data for it soon. I'll connect a drive to it, and I'll just start running a program that clones everything from the project folder onto that drive to at least save some time. So when I'm finally done, I just sync the last few files I could take it, and then I start dumping it off on my computer.
What kind of computers are you using for that?
I use PC. I can't afford Mac, not for the scope and purposes of which I use. My Dragon Frame computers don't have to be anything special. Most of them are like 5-year-old i5 processors with like maybe 8 gigs of RAM, and then I would rip out the garbage hard drive and put in like a solid state drive, and then I'll load Dragon Frame on it and a couple management software packages, and then that's it. There's nothing else that goes on it. And if you do that cheap little $500 laptop will last you forever because you're not really doing a lot with it. Right. So, you know, replacing those with like a Mac is just absolutely overkill. It's far beyond what they need.
What about your YouTube videos? How do you edit them? What do you edit them on?
Well, I've got a PC that I had built up. It was considered pretty fast back in the day, but it's starting to slow down. But I just that PC. I think it's a Ryzen 3900X processor, 64 gigs of fast RAM, and an older but still pretty good like 1080 Ti graphics card, and that gets me to be able to do most of what I want. If I start needing to edit 8K footage, especially through Adobe packages and software, it becomes incredibly difficult to do. But I've been making a transition over to DaVinci Resolve. It just seems to be able to handle larger files a lot smoother than Adobe does. But then recently, I also picked up a new laptop, and I'm absolutely in love with it. It's arguably one of the fastest laptops money can possibly buy. It's got the 12th gen i9 processor, 64 gigs of DDR4 RAM, and then about 5 terabytes of solid or NVMe drives on it, and a 3080 Ti graphics card built in. It absolutely screams. And with this, I can do some pretty heavy editing and photo work, and I'll use a dock and I'll actually connect it to where it connects with my other PC, and I can flip between my PC and my laptop with a button and use the same mouse, keyboard, displays, and all that.
Did you build it yourself?
Well, not the laptop. PCs, yes. I always end up building my own if it's a like a tower system. It just saves you a lot of money, and I think it's good to understand what's going on in these things, especially if you have to maintain it and troubleshoot it. I mean, a lot of my laptops, I've already replaced the batteries in all of them at least once. Cooling fans, I replaced the cooling fans in them several times. I run into sometimes where I have to shoot a subject that requires a lot of humidity, and one of the easiest ways to keep that humidity up is use like a pond fogger, and it's like the ultrasonic humidifier. Problem is they kick little minerals out in the air, and they like to get gummed up in fans, so they've destroyed the fans in many of my strobes, many of my PCs. So it's one of those things, though. It's just a cost of doing this work. You can't really seal those things and prevent that from happening. You just do your best to mitigate it, and then when a fan craps out, just go on eBay, buy a new one, pop open the laptop, swap it out, and then you're good for probably several more years. I think I've got one laptop I've been using for my Robot Auto for probably about 5 or 6 years now, maybe 7, since 2015, 7 years. So yeah, even cheap Windows PCs will last you forever if you don't do much with them.
Yeah, yeah. When you say you have all of these computers linked to the robots, how much of your equipment is in use at any given moment?
I try to keep as much of it in use at any given moment as possible, as much as I can actually maintain and handle myself. Some shoots are really easy. You get them up, you get them going, and they'll almost shoot themselves. That's not very often, though. A lot of times it does require a lot of manual intervention, a lot of effort. You have to, if you're looking to see, okay, this shoot isn't working, or this isn't happening right, or something's going wrong. Like any one of my shoots, especially if I'm looking at some of my larger sets, I'm building in watering systems, irrigation systems, potentially mixing that with hydroponic systems of varying kinds into a set in order to accommodate all the plants that are going to go in there, so they're nice, they're healthy, they're growing, they're vibrant. And at any given time, any bit of that can go wrong. And then on top of it, you have the subject that you're filming, and that can go wrong. And on top of that, there's a lot of event orchestration that has to happen to pull these kind of shots off. You have to be able to give the plants a nighttime. They don't want light 24/7. They're going to get old and they're going to die, and they're going to have problems with that. Some plants are fine with it, but not many. So you have to give them that. And you don't want the grow light to be the light that you're using to film with, because it's not going to look as good. So then you have to figure out how do you film with one light, grow with another, provide day and night schedules, and not disrupt the plant when it sleeps. And then on top of that, I've got all the mechanics of the robot. Sometimes things can go wrong. Some of these robots, they've got large, heavy moving parts, and sometimes something might get jammed up, or maybe like a washer. that I was working on a part of it earlier and left a washer on top, and then it falls off and it goes in a bearing and then it just jams the thing up. These are all things that can happen. So some of the shoots can be very intensive on my time. Some of them aren't. It's really hard to tell how it's going to go. Some of it's just luck of the draw. But I do try to keep as many things going as at any given time as I can, even if it's kind of like a high risk shot that I really don't expect is going to work out. I'll at least give it a shot. Every time there's a failure, I mean, if I pick up something from it, it's going to help me later on. So it's
well, that was actually one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, what's the biggest screw up of all that you can remember?
There's a couple that were pretty embarrassing where I really screwed up. I remember one time I had a robot and it was filming on a set, and this is one of my tower robots, and they're just these long, tall towers, and they got a crossbar, and then the camera can slide back and forth on the crossbar on the like an arm that sticks out with a pan and tilt, and that entire assembly will go up and down, and that entire tower sits on tracks, allowing it to move forwards and backwards. They're super reliable, super accurate. I absolutely love those towers. They're just very, very high performance systems. I mean, they work better than my gantry systems do most of the time. But I've had one time where it started binding up and having problems because of one of the bearings got offset, and it basically took the camera and plowed it down. Well, not plowed it in a really fast sense. It was more of a slow crush, ripping it through the set, because the problem is every time it tried to go up, it would jam, but it could move down. So it started up here and it was kind of doing this, moving the camera around, but eventually the camera gets lower and lower because it's no longer able to go up. And it just started racking itself across the set and digging into it. And when I came out in the morning, the set was just demolished and the camera is on the ground, literally being pushed into the concrete floor. And it's like up at an angle looking up, just like, help me. There's times like that and that happened overnight, and it was a mechanical failure that you really couldn't foresee. I take time to service these robots, make sure that all the mechanics are in good working order and that everything's moving freely. But nonetheless, sometimes things can go wrong. And then there's other times where I just completely screwed up. I was filming a lot of cholla cactus. If anybody has had the unpleasantness of being around these things, they also call them jumping cactus. And I've actually still have some that I'm growing in my workshop as just a souvenir from Green Planet. But I have been hit by a cholla cactus in Colorado more than anybody else. I guarantee this, because they don't grow here. But I had a whole bunch of them out in my studio. And I remember it was towards the end of the filming. There were a couple shots that I still needed, and it was, I think, around September or October, and I had a little greenhouse outside, and I wanted them to get lots of regular light as much as I could. I try not to rely on grow lights as much unless I really need to. Right. And the temperature dropped down to about 20 degrees, and I came out the next morning, and they were just limp and laying on the ground, just basically turned themselves into soup because they don't like that really cold temperature, and destroyed them. So, I mean, there are times where I definitely have screwed up.
How many robots do you actually have? It's not 8, is it?
So I've got 2 of my tower robots. I had 4 of those at one point, and 2 of those went with the BBC as part of the agreement with the BBC, which was fine with me because that moved out some room to where I could bring up my gantry system, Otto. Otto was the first robot that I built. It was a dragon frame robot, and I still use it all the time, even today. It's been in use for probably close to 7 years. And
why Otto?
I remember building it, and the idea is I wanted a camera that was on a gantry that was overhead, that it could move it anywhere, and also up and down, and then it also had pan, tilt, roll, and even a little tiny micro slider beneath it that could go left and right eye perception if I wanted to do 3D filming. And I built it. When I was building it, it just reminded me of that movie Otto, or the movie WALL-E, because there was the cruise ship in WALL-E, and Otto was AUTO for autopilot, but it was like this thing that with an eye that hang down from the ceiling, and it just kind of reminded me of that. But this thing, I called it Otto as OTTO. It was just kind of an homage to that. But that was the first robot that I had built, and then I ended up building 4 of these tower robots next, and that was for a contract working for History Channel for a series about agriculture. And with that, I was able to build my studio and build those 4 robots. So at that point, I had 5. And then the BBC wanted me to build them robots, and they wanted 2 of my towers. So I built 3 gantry systems for them, 2 towers, 3 what they call triffids, which were the field kit robots. It was like a long slider with a jib on it and a camera on the end of that, and they could move around and raise up and down. And then I also had built a couple really like macro shooting platforms for them, so a system that they could take out to the field and plop down and shoot very, very small subjects reliably and accurately with motion. Then I also built myself another gantry robot, and then 2 of these little macro shooting systems, because a lot of the stuff that the BBC was asking me to shoot was pretty small.
Rail itself moving in several degrees of freedom, or is the rail fixed?
So the macro systems, they're a little bit different than the other robots I built. The other robots I built are all about moving a camera around a subject. The macro systems, on the other hand, were about moving the subject in front of the camera. Rather than having the camera have to dance all the way around it, because then you need to build like a gantry, it needs to be able to go all the way around, and it just gets really big. The idea of this was to build a rotating turntable that sat on an X and Y axis platform, so it can move it all around like this and rotate and spin it, and it could hold about 50 pounds worth of weight and worth of set. So I could build a nice decent size set on it, maybe about the size of this welding table on the very large end, and actually rotate the set. Then the camera itself was on a riser with a pan and tilt function, and then it also had a focus control, and I built 2 of those. So for a while I had 2 of those macro shooting robots, 2 towers, and 2 gantry rigs inside my studio. The newest gantry rig is Dan, and it's the largest and it's the nicest looking, and it offers a larger shooting area, but it doesn't really have any inherent benefit over auto. It's just a second one. And then I've also got motion control kits that are from manufacturers, from companies. I've got a couple. I've got a Motomo Spectrum ST4 full 4-axis kit with that. I've got a couple Cineshooter 4-axis kits, a couple second shooter 4-axis kits. I've got an Axibo, which is that new virtual production system that I've been playing with. And then I've got some equipment from Black Forest Motion. And I've also used equipment from quite a few other manufacturers. So when it comes to motion control equipment, I definitely have an absolute ton, but I use as much of it as I can, as often as I can.
Remind me again how many full-time photographers you have on your team?
And count, well, if I'm not counting the robots, just me. But luckily, a lot of my shoots might take 2, 3, 4 weeks to do. Some of them, like I'm gearing up to do one here for another production company. The subject they're wanting me to film, that's going to be about a 3-month-long shoot.
When you were talking at the beginning about the long-term project with the forest reforestation,
yeah,
how long is that slated to take? You're filming a forest being replanted and regrowing, yeah?
Yeah. So it's there's no end date to it that's really determined just yet. So the idea is this company, they use drones, and it's called Drone Seed is the company. It's a fantastic organization. Everybody should look them up. I really believe in what they're doing. So what they will do is they have drones, these big drones. They're huge, like the size of a dinner table, and they'll take off with this big heavy payload. And I don't want to give away any of their intellectual property, but basically they've got vessels that they will deploy from that, and they will drop and scatter these vessels throughout a burn area. And those vessels will go down, land on the ground, and it provides what the plant needs in order to give it a little boost and a good chance of starting off. So when you're going out, and if you look at some of these places, like I've been out in the logging roads just southeast of Moala, which is southeast of Portland in Oregon. and you go out there and it just got just ravaged by wildfire, or well, I guess all wildfire, forest fire. It was just absolutely decimated, and that was one of the locations that Drone Seed was out there deploying these vessels. So my portion of this is to kind of help manage their time-lapse work, because they want to show that this works. They want to be able to show actual documented proof that it works. So I work in regards to two different ways for them. One way is by handling all the long-term camera systems out there. And long-term camera systems, it's just an interesting bag dealing with that. There's some pretty cool systems on the market that have a lot of capability. But if you're in a remote area with no network access, it all of a sudden becomes very difficult to set that equipment up, because a lot of it requires a subscription or requires network access. And these are commonly used in areas like cities where you're doing construction time lapse. And that way the client can get an up-to-date, up-to-minute view of what's going on with what's been pulled from the cameras and built by the AI that drives the interface. However, in this case, those systems are very expensive, and they wanted a whole bunch of cameras out in areas that don't have any kind of network access. So I'd already been building these long-term capture rigs for the BBC. I built probably about maybe a dozen for them. And some of them worked, some of them didn't. It was a very interesting learning process for me. And I just continued to refine those as best I could until the end of that contract. And then when Drone Seed wanted to do this, I just went ahead and started putting all this effort into trying to make them nicer and nicer and nicer. So these days they don't have network access, but they were inexpensive enough to build for Drone Seed that we can put out dozens of these things in capture areas. And if Bigfoot comes over and smashes one down, or if a coyote rips another one off, or whatever it is, you lose one. That's why you kind of go in bulk. If snow comes in, there's like 12 feet of snow on it, and ends up bending the area where it's actually didn't anticipate how deep it would be. You got 4 other cameras in the area that are also filming. So it's kind of one of those shooting a shotgun and hoping that you hit.
I presume that you're using sunshine to generate electricity, but still you're going to have batteries in there to store the electricity. How long, in those kind of cold conditions in the mountains, how long will a battery last? I mean, what's its useful life?
I'm not sure how long it's going to last if it's really cold. That does become a problem. But for example, well, let's just say if the weather is decent out, meaning anything like 50 degrees and above, you can take one of these things and you can disconnect the solar panel and put it out there, and it'll continue to work for about a week. After that, it will actually shut down. But once the sun comes back out, it immediately resumes. We had one that was out up in Oregon that did get completely covered by snow for probably about 3 months. And you can see, you're watching the footage all the way up to this point, and then you start seeing there's snow, and then all of a sudden you just see like a white, just because there's just enough light penetrating the snow, it can kind of see it, and the camera's like in a program auto mode, so it's actually going to extend the exposure and all that to try to capture it. Doesn't see it completely dark, so you just see a series of these images where it's just white, and then all of a sudden it just ends, and then 3 months later you have a new image and it just picks right back up where it left off. So yeah, the batteries definitely can go out, and that's there's a million things that can go wrong with anything.
I mean, do you use any kind of special glass to partition the inside from the outside of the box? Something that cleans itself? I mean,
no, I've looked into various types of glass on it, and I finally settled on one that had really good optical qualities, but a spider still might decide to make a web right on the lens someday. There's a lot of these things that you really can't deal with. Careful setup is the most important thing. We had one camera that was out there and it was looking down in this area, and it was really kind of neat, but it turns out that area was just a natural wind funnel and would bring the wind right up. And even though the camera's looking down, it would blast it with like rain, snow, and everything. And like the wind actually would carry it up into it. So, in a case like that, there's not much you can do. But just generally, you just want a good optic grade glass that you can shoot through.
Do you have any footage yet from that project that you can show, or is that still?
Unfortunately, nothing that I can really show because that's all property of Drone Seed because I'm filming it for them.
Got it.
I know that we've got about a year worth of footage at this point, and we got quite a few cameras out there. And here soon, they're going to start putting that stuff out. And when they do, I'll be showing kind of examples on that, on social media and things. But so far they work pretty good. The fun thing about, especially if it's a really long-term capture, is you set the system to take a picture at the same time every day, not just every 10 minutes or every hour or whatever. You want it every hour on the hour. So you want it every hour, 1 o'clock, it'll take an image. It'll take more throughout the day, but then you take every picture from 1 o'clock over the course of like 6 months and you put them together. You get the shadows moving, but instead of being like a day to night transition from the shadows and the movement of the sun, it's actually the seasonal change, and you see where the sun is from on the horizon. So it's kind of neat. You can get some. The longer you go with it, actually, the better the footage looks because you can ditch so many of the frames and just single out a certain specific time of the day where it looks the nicest and just run with those.
Have I not seen a time lapse like that of your back garden?
You might have. I've got. It's not that I don't have any footage of them. I have a lot of footage from them. When I was building all of these for Drone Seed, I had them all back in my backyard, and they were all on, and they were all filming the entire time. And I'd be going out there and doing daily checks on them, making sure the voltage is good, making sure they took all the images they were expecting to, making sure the clocks didn't drift. Give them a real solid run through. And I got a lot of footage from that. And I did have one on top of my studio for about a year looking out into my cul-de-sac. But it's not particularly compelling footage. It's footage that proves that the system works, but people like seeing something more interesting in my backyard, which is an absolute disaster. I do have a time lapse though going in my studio that I've been running for about 2 years now.
Oh, the one in your workshop you were telling me about?
Yeah, it's up in the corner of my studio. It sees the whole area and it's been running for 2 years. And in there, there's sequences. I mean, all these different sets that I had built, sets going up, coming down. I got a period where I was growing a bunch of sunflowers inside under grow lights in there. You see those things coming up. I haven't actually reviewed the footage yet, but it's been collecting. And every time I'm thinking I'm going to pull that camera, I look up and I'm like, I could still do another couple thousand images on this memory card. Easy.
What's the most satisfying moment you've had in this career of yours? What's the biggest hit, the biggest win?
I don't know if there's a biggest. I mean, there's a lot of experimentation that goes around and a lot of doing something really unusual. On this clip, you see this orange and you see it drying out and it looks like it's starting to gather some mold. And then just watch what happens. It reverses and it starts to fill back out. But the interesting thing about this is one long, steady, continuous camera movement where time reverses multiple times on it. This was really tricky to figure out. So the idea is normally when you're looking at this kind of footage and you're seeing like fruit rotting and stuff like that, if you see it unrot, if the camera's moving in towards the footage and then it starts to unrot, they just reverse the footage and the camera starts moving out. I've been able to manage to keep that camera on one steady path the entire way through, where it will rot and unrot and rot and unrot. So I can reverse time multiple times without interrupting the course and trajectory of the camera. That was a very satisfying feel that I actually managed to pull that off. I'm always trying to find something new, something different to do. I'm always trying to figure out, I don't like doing the same thing over and over. Of course, if a client wants me to film some stuff for them, of course I'm going to do it. Somebody wants me to be a robot for them, of course I'll do it. But when it comes to my personal interest, I want to try to do something that hasn't been done before, and that really is a huge driving force for me. So coming up with the idea of how can I film these different sets of these fruits rotting and then unrotting without altering the camera path, pulling that off felt really good. Pulling off that shot with an Appenthus where I was following it, watching as this goes down and things start moving into the world of time lapse from just being like almost video in the time lapse, and you have this little nub there. And I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know how big it's going to get. I don't know which direction it's going to aim when I first do it. And this was an excellent example of being able to alter and change and correct for the path, because this thing got so big I couldn't fit it all in frame, but I wanted to keep the top of it in frame. I wanted to get that lid to open. And it's not perfect. There's a couple issues with it, but I did manage to accomplish the overall move. And that really felt good being able to do that, because I had never seen anybody else do something like that. I'm sure there's always somebody else who's done it first. It was probably on The Simpsons. But
did you know, before you did this shot, did you know that creeper, that feeler, comes out and bobs around looking presumably for a good place to put the picture? Or was this a complete surprise?
I mean, I didn't know where it was going to be, but I wasn't going to be surprised of anywhere it would end up, because that was the purpose of this exercise with that filming that particular portion, was to see, can I correct for this? Can I adjust for the movement of this? Right. Pretty much any time I do something that I've just never seen anybody do before, that's what I like the best. There was another time where I was working on Green Planet, and I can't show this one because it's not my footage, unfortunately, but I was shooting, once again, the Appenthus on this big tropical set that I'd built in my studio. And one of the problems I was running into was the grow lights, when they would turn on, all the leaves, like the leaf litter on the bottom of the set, would turn up and curl. Right. And react with that light. Even if I was keeping the studio temperature solid, it would curl up and react with that light. And then if it's a long subject that you're filming, that means your ground is doing this the whole time, and it gets very distracting. So how do you work around that when you have a pitcher plant that's growing out of pitcher? It takes a long time. So what I had done was I took this, I got the pitcher plant, put it in the place where it was going to be, had the set ready, and then there was that little pitcher that was starting to come out on the top, and I put a piece of kind of like foam paper, blue foam paper behind it, and then I just let it go ahead and grow out. And I filmed it growing out with that blue foam paper behind it. When I was done, I went ahead and I pulled that foam paper out. I wet down the set really good, got everything nice and wet. And then I reran the move. Even though I had made adjustments for it and corrected for it, all of that stuff was still built into that movement profile. And then I reran it again, but at a much faster rate. Maybe about, instead of going 30 minutes between images, I was probably about like 3 seconds between images. So I racked all of that up really quickly, but it was still a time lapse. And you still see a little bit of movement on the ground and the leaves and stuff. They're just not doing this so much. Yeah. And then what I did was I, superimposed them and used a keyer on the, what do you call it? The that blue foam piece that I put behind the plant, and then it punched that background in, and it just looked perfect. Everything lined up perfect. So I caught the subject in one pass, the background in the second pass, put them together, and it just seemed it would just went together seamlessly. It was absolutely wonderful. And that was another one of those times where I put it together and I'm seeing it and looking at the final result, and I was just like, man, that is awesome. I'm gonna have to remember this, you know.
Why did you use blue to key off? Because of the green leaves, probably?
Yeah, you can't use green, because if you use green to key off the green, you lose most of the plant. Turns out, honestly, though, if you actually do an examination into the colors to find out what will be the one that really stands out as the cleanest, strongest channel to key off of, blue works fantastic for green. You'd think you could put up like orange or fuchsia or something like that that's completely different, but no, it turns out blue really is the best.
Yep. Let me ask you a quick question about software, because a lot of people have asked me this. Other than Dragon Frame, what software packages do you use for your video editing and your other activities?
For basic video assembly and editing, I'm still using Premiere Pro 90% of the time. And the reason for that is I'm familiar with Premiere Pro. I understand how to use it, and I can use it effectively because I've already established a good workflow in it. I also use DaVinci Resolve, but not nearly as much. And it's not because of a problem with DaVinci Resolve. It's because I have not been able to establish a workflow. In fact, let me just take a moment and harp over workflow. That is the most important thing when it comes to this work. When it comes to the work that I do, especially not so much as like the building of the robots, but the workflow when it comes to working in the studio and filming subjects. Having a good workflow established is absolutely critical because you can waste so much time if you don't. Especially when it gets to the point where you're doing the post-processing. So, for example, not that long ago, I was filming some plants for a friend of mine for a little venture that he was wanting to try to embark on. And I ended up filming these plants, and they're just green. And I filmed them in front of a blue screen, and they were filmed with a 5DS and a 5DSR from Canon. So those are like 50 megapixel sensors, and they're able to do 8K footage. And taking 50 megapixel 8K footage, it became this absolute beast for people to handle this footage. People that are familiar with time-lapse are familiar with using systems like Red cameras or Aries, where you have these serious, like just data hog systems, are probably a little bit more familiar with it. With working with that, but you really need a very fast PC, and even with a fast PC, it can take you forever to get through it. So workflow is critical. What's the first step I need to do in order to make the next step easier, but still regain and still maintain that quality and establish it, especially if you're working with chroma key. If you don't do things in the right order, it can cause problems. So with DaVinci Resolve, I ended up trying to learn how to use it, and I got somewhat decent with it, but I still don't have that workflow that I have with Premiere Pro. But I will use DaVinci. And then as far as other programs, I use Photoshop a lot. Especially if I'm filming something that's not through Dragonframe, or if I'm filming when I'm filming through Dragonframe, I can pull a ProRes 422 out of Dragonframe just fine, but it does use the JPEGs as the source. But I also record everything with the raw format. So if it's something that's just is a little bit not hitting the lighting just right, or if I need to pull a little bit more out of shadows or a little bit out of the highlights, I'll pull out those and I'll throw them into all those CR2 images. I'll throw them all into Photoshop and Adobe Raw and just bring them all in at the same time. I'll go about halfway in there, pick one of the images, and then I will select all of them and edit that one image, and it'll make those edits to all of the images. So I'll use that to adjust any kind of color, white balance, things like that. And then I very well may go ahead and crop it 16:9 in there, but a lot of times I won't, because I want to have that little extra that I can kind of move around in. So once I get done with that, then, I'll bring that into Premiere Pro and stitch them together. Resolve will do it a little bit easier, and it doesn't take as much resources to do it. It seems to be smarter about the way that it handles that much data. But those are a couple programs I use. For focus stacking, I'm probably going to be the bad guy here, because the one I use is Helicon, and I'm pretty sure that you're friends with the guy who wrote, I believe it's Zephyr?
Zerine, yeah.
Zerine.
Littlefield is a friend of mine.
Yeah.
But the guys at Helicon are too, so...
Okay. Because, at the end of the day, when I was first examining how to do focus stack time-lapse, I knew I needed a program that was going to be able to do batch editing, because I'm not going to sit there and do 300 stacks and hope they all come out similar. It's just not going to happen. And at the end of the day, I just had to pick one. But I do like the program. It works fairly well. I wish I knew more about what I was doing with it. I've figured out there's certain times where you want to do different kind of weightings on it. But at the end of the day, my responsibility was not to make the footage look perfect for a lot of these productions. So they'll actually have people that are dedicated towards this kind of work, that are experts in these fields, to make it look as nice as possible.
What do you use for cataloging, storing, filing?
Windows Explorer. Windows Explorer.
You don't use a Lightroom type.
No. I have always struggled with Lightroom. I don't know if it's like if it hits a psychological blind spot with me. I have just really had a lot of difficulty with Lightroom, even feeling like I was willing to tolerate it. And I think one of the things is, when I first started getting into computers, I remember my dad had a computer. It was a 286. Had like 8 megs of RAM, and like maybe like a 40 meg hard drive. And I remember back then getting into the operating system where it wasn't Windows, you're just in like DOS. And I was really meticulous about computers back then of keeping everything exactly where I wanted it. And then there came a time where I just kind of fell out of the computer thing and I didn't follow it very much. And I come back in, I pretty much I've always been a bit of a control freak when it comes to things like that. I don't like file management systems that are going to try to do things for me, catalog things for me, put things in place for me, ranking things and all that. I've never had any interest in it. That's not to say that it's not useful. It's just it's not something that really ever really kind of clicked with me. So generally, I've got certain ways in which I handle and move my data. I've got a couple really fast NVMe drives that I load everything on, and that's kind of like my workbench. That's where all the things that I need at the moment are there as I'm editing and cutting something together. When I'm done, I'll move that entire project off to just a regular HDD, and then if it's actually done and I'm not going to need that anymore, I'll store it into an external drive. But I do have kind of overall ways in which I keep things so where generally I manage to keep track of everything without losing everything, but that's not always the case. There was a case very recently. I lost some footage, and that was pretty embarrassing.
How big is your RAID system? Do you have a NAS on site?
I've got 2 NASs, and I don't really use either of them for anything because they're so incredibly slow. Like they're just a couple like Buffalo link stations. They're nothing really big. I really got put off on that brand. I had a failure on one of the drives, and during the fixing process, going step by step, it destroyed the other drive. The other drive happened to go out just at that moment. Maybe it was a coincidence, but I ended up having to spend about $200 on some pretty fancy recovery software to go through and find all these old family photos that I'd scanned that I had on there because it was supposed to be safe. So at this point, I would love to get a nice a NAS, but one of the things is for me is just overall speed. And when I look at it, I have had hard drives fail on such a spectacularly low rate that for me it just hasn't been worth the effort. Don't get me wrong, if somebody wants to get me like a 96 terabyte RAID 0 that can read at like 6,000, for like hit 6,000 on the read benchmarks, I am sold, but I think I'd probably use that same money and just buy a Lamborghini.
Me too.
I'll just buy a lot of HDDs and we'll
Yeah. I use a lot of external drives just for storage, and it works fine. If there's any reason I have to pull stuff off, I know generally where it is. I catalog everything by year or project, and then I label all of my drives.
I have so many hard drives on my desk that they actually heat my room up now. And they make a constant buzzing noise as well.
You got that nice 2,000 watt power supply.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm conscious of your time, and I don't want to keep you all weekend for crying out loud. But let me ask one question that I know some of our younger people will be really interested to hear. For somebody who's just getting started, they're really into the whole videography thing, and they want to follow in your footsteps. This is what gets them fired up: the time lapse and having your own business. What advice do you give them?
Boy, I tell you what, there's the business advice, and then there's the creative advice. The business advice, I think the best 3 words I've ever heard is "what's your budget?" I think it's especially when you're talking with clients, it's important to start getting that conversation about money out for expectations. And nobody ever wants to give their budget, but sometimes it's nice when they do, because you're like, okay, I know exactly where you're at and I know what we can do. But let's back up a little bit before you get to the point where you're asking about budgets. I wish I knew who I could credit this quote to. I really don't know. Maybe you'll know, but this is what I found to be like just the most profoundly best advice I'd ever heard in the world of doing creative things, and this ties in with photography. And that is, if you ever stop and look around and find yourself surrounded by photographers, you're in the wrong place. I realize that as a sports photographer, you're going to be in the pit with everybody else. I realize that as a fashion photographer, you're going to be in the same place as everybody else. I get that.
Yeah.
Those are also industries that are incredibly difficult to break into. You're going to have to, a lot of times it's going to help to know someone. I didn't know anybody. What I found is I had this drive to build these things and a drive to do this time lapse and a drive to do things. And I saw what other people did and it inspired me, but I had no interest in in doing it the same way. There is a shot in the world of time lapse they call the holy grail of time lapse. And that's to go from, a nice midday all the way over to like 3 a.m. at the darkest hour and get that solid, smooth transition from light to dark all the way through. And that's called the holy grail of time lapse. And I absolutely reject that term. That is, when I first started in time lapse, that was an incredibly difficult thing to pull off. But these days, most cameras will just do it in camera. Most motion control systems will handle it for you. There's all these gizmos and gadgets. So I've done that once and I never did it again. And that's one of the things that people will go out. They'll spend all these hours setting up, going out to this beautiful location and filming it. You have the rocky terrain, you have that tortured tree, and then you have that gorgeous sky going from blue to orange to purple, and then that burst of red as everything goes to dark, and then those stars coming along. And it's an impressive shot. It's just everybody's done it. And I have found myself more interested in doing things that I just hadn't really seen done. But I also had the luxury of a very good career in telecom. I was making good money. I was having solid progression. I had the benefit of having a house with a basement with a spare room that had full light control. I had the benefit of having some leftover equipment from back when Kyle and I were selling time-lapse systems, and I already had a couple cameras at that point. And I could dedicate that space in that spot. And a lot of people, if you're paying for a studio, that studio is money. Time is money. You can't necessarily wrap the entire thing up for 2 months on one particular shot because you need it for other things. So I had a lot of things that really helped with that, but it also allowed me to kind of step out away from what I saw everybody else doing and really kind of try to forge my own path. I remember seeing a botanic time-lapse sequence. I can't remember what program it's off of. It was a BBC one. It was like a big log and there are all these flowers and things blooming out all around it. I remember seeing that and thinking, I wonder if I can do that myself without the need of an engineer, without the need of a photographer, without the need of a botanist, a set designer, an engineer, an expert in like mechanics, watering, plumbing, things like that. I wonder if I can do all of that myself. And that was kind of one of those drives because I didn't know anybody else that was doing this stuff. And that's what really pulled my interest. And now my interests continue to go in ways where I'm trying to find something new. What can I do that nobody else has done yet? And there's so few things because, like I said, the Simpsons have done everything. Don't look at what everybody else is doing and think that that's the way to do it. Don't look at it like people have a problem with that. They look at something, they say, I want to do this. And they're like, well, how does this person do it? How does that person do it? I think it's better to just try to figure out how to do it yourself with a clean mind and stop really trying to recreate what other people have done. During that process, you might recreate things that other people have done. There's things that I have filmed that other people have filmed before, of course. But, going about it my own way has actually worked really well. I think it's just best not to try to look at what other people are doing for the most part and just think, what is it that I'd like to do? What's something that's going to be challenging? Now, how do I go do it? But like I said, when it comes to the first people doing it, I'm not kidding. Just today, last night I filmed this thing using like that in-camera special effects with the big LED screen and the camera and the Unreal Engine and it putting just to the camera, like the screen, literally you see this little window and that's the only area that the camera can see. And as the camera moves, that screen moves and the background is 3D and it's represented and it's beautiful and it's awesome. And I thought, I did it. I got a time lapse. It worked. Time lapsing through this. I'm like, I don't know if I've ever heard of anybody else doing this. And one of the reasons is just the sheer cost to get in something like that. This is very, very, very new that somebody can actually start doing this in their home. So I was like pretty proud of myself. I think I'm the first one that did it. Nope. This another time-lapse photographer, well-known time-lapse photographer, really nice guy, sends me a message or replies on my posts today. He's like, hate to say it, you're not the first. Did that in February 2021. He was working on a movie set, I guess, and they needed a time lapse, but they used that virtual stage for it. And I was like, well, I'm the first one who did it when I own the system. This is just an area in the back corner of my studio. I've got a little socket in there, and I'd been filming stuff in there, and then it was a good place to kind of move this in. So, I put a big LED TV on the wall, and I got the robot on there, and I put a little pedestal to build a little set, and went through all the effort to learn how to build a virtual environment in Unreal and how to make it connect, and there's a lot of steps to it. It took me probably about 6 weeks to sort out just to be able to get the camera and the TV to do what they're supposed to do. But it's in my studio and it works. So now that I know it works, I got a little bit of tweaking to do, and it's going to be pretty much in use nonstop because I've got a lot of ideas of what I can do. A lot of the times when I'm filming a subject, especially if it's a smaller subject, I'm building a small set. And that set's usually going to be a little bit of a bowl shape, so it fills up all the way around the frame as you're looking in there. And a lot of my walls in my studio are painted with like that Roscoe chroma key paint. So if a little bit bleeds out, I can always chroma key something in there. But you just want to build this setup. And the problem is that it always looks like a small set then. It always feels enclosed in. It doesn't have this nice expanse to it. And that's what I'm seeing with this. Now I can still build that set for like these small subjects. It's still going to be a small set, but now it doesn't have to be a bowl and end in the back. So instead of just going over and seeing a big log in the back, and you have like a mushroom growing here and there's a log behind it and some bushes, you can have this mushroom growing outside of the tree and be looking through and see like a sea of trees behind it. And as you move to the camera to the side, that parallax hits all of them, and it's going to give such an immense of expanse to what was traditionally very difficult to give that kind of a level of feel to.
That's the perfect segue, because people are going to want to know. Everybody who has seen Green Planet wants to know what you're doing next, and everybody who hasn't seen Green Planet needs to.
I gotta first say real quick though, with Green Planet, and I am not joking, this absolutely was a team effort. On the promo, you kind of joked that they threw me into the anthill and everything, but that wasn't me out there. Those were my robots that I built. I showed them how to use them, and I turned this technology over to just these absolute creative geniuses that took it to an amazing level. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty of my footage in there too. There's also a lot of footage from a gentleman, Tim Shepard. He has been the BBC's go-to guy for botanic time-lapse. He is an absolute gentleman. He is a wonderful human being, and is just his level of work is just absolutely outstanding. All the camera operators, the producers, the researchers, everybody was amazing. So when looking at Green Planet, the one thing I like about it is all of the motion except for the drone shots were filmed on systems that I built. So even if it's not my particular shot, my thumbprints are all over it, and that feels pretty good. And then when I do see my shots in there, like if you watch the water episode, there's a sequence about a utricularia. It's a type of bladderwort, and it hunts.
Yeah.
It literally hunts, and it will travel from one bromeliad to another, expanding out, reaching out, looking for a new hunting ground. And then it'll go into that bromeliad and regrow itself and eat everything out of it. And these bromeliads are even carnivorous themselves. They require the capture of bugs and stuff in there. And these bromeliads the utricularia will go build itself in the bromeliad and starve it out. And then it'll go find another bromeliad. So, filming things like that has always been awesome. But I just had to give a shout out to the rest of the people, because Green Planet was definitely it was a big group effort, and I was honored to be a part of it. As far as what's next, I don't know. I don't really have any huge things going on. I've got steady work coming in. I find myself doing a lot of engineering these days. I did build a couple really long-term sliders for Bayer. You know, they bought Monsanto and they're pushing out this new crop, like a herbicide, and they wanted to film and show an entire cornfield growing without seeing one single weed in there. And in order to do it, they wanted to shoot it out on location. They wanted to make it as big as possible, and they wanted the camera moving during this. And that I'd never seen that done. I'm not aware of any motion control systems that run off solar that you can deploy out there. So they reached out to me, and within 2 weeks, I had built and engineered two solar powered slider rigs that they could take out there. So that was a really fun project to work on, you know. And then there's a series about food coming out. I don't really know how much I can say about any of these, but the production company is kind of putting it out there, saying that this would be like Planet Earth for food. The idea is it's got 5, 6, 7 episodes, and each episode goes on a specific food, like salt or corn or chili peppers. And so it looks like I'm going to be doing some work with that, and I'm going to keep working with drone seed. And yeah, I'm always looking forward to seeing what's coming up next. But so far, things have been relatively steady.
Where can people go to catch up on your back catalog? Where's the best place to see your stuff?
I got a website, biolapse.com, where I put some of my footage. The problem is I'm not very good at working on web stuff. It's just like your typical WordPress site, and I don't have a guy to do that. I don't have anybody to do anything. I've got a million hats that I have to wear, so it's not always up to date. And then a lot of the time I'm filming, it's stuff that I just can't show anyway until the production comes out. So there's a National Geographic has our Great National Park series. They've got the first 5 episodes that have already been released. I believe this is on Disney Plus, and here soon they're going to be releasing the next 5 episodes. And I have some work in the Lake Charles episode and in the Voyagers episode. A lot of work that I'd put in the Voyagers episode. So I'm excited about those coming out. But you can always go to my website. I've got a sampling of stuff on there. My Instagram is a good place to see footage, and that's kind of an amalgamation of my engineering efforts and my time-lapse efforts, because they are so heavily intertwined. But that's on Instagram. And once again, BIOLAPSE is BIOLAPSE. Search up BIOLAPSE on YouTube. You'll find me on there too. I even have some old stuff on Vimeo. Nothing within the past probably 5 years on there. And then I've also got another website, thechronosproject.com, and this is something that I've just been putting together that I haven't really released yet. But I've been building all these different things for all these different people. And recently I had to build a couple can launchers. I've got a friend who works, his name is Marchin, and he works at Man-Made Studio out here in Colorado. And he's got one of those Bolt Cinema arms, you know, those really high-speed robot arms.
He's not the guy who pulled the tablecloth out from under the...
No, that's Steve Geralt. He's also very well known for this work. Him and he works with a couple other people like Matt Huber, and they just do amazing work. And that's kind of the area that Marchin's wanting to get into with Man-Made Studio. And his work is just simply top level. I'm amazed with everything that I see come from him, but he wants to do some more of that trick flying stuff. So I engineered a couple beer can tossers from him, and it's a cross between like PVC. A lot of it's been printed from polycarbonate and then spring powered, and use electromagnetic latch system to release it, and it can accurately toss a beer can, you know, probably about 10 feet. You get a nice little arc in it. It's not meant to shoot it through a wall. It's meant to be low power, but I've also built him a fireball generator too. And then a couple catapults. So he's got a phantom camera coming, and here soon we're going to play around and see if we can orchestrate things for those kinds of shoots. But I find myself building a lot of these things, and once it's built, it's already been built, it's been engineered. I have all the plans, I have the files, I have everything I need for my CNC plasma or my mill or my printers in order to recreate them. So I decided anytime I build something like that, I'm going to start putting it up for sale. If anybody else wants to buy it, I can make more.
I was going to ask, do any of your inventions, any of your builds show up on GitHub or any of the maker platforms? Have you ever posted any of that stuff?
No. I used to, the website is called thechronosproject.com. That website, Kyle and I used to sell lens control kits and time-lapse sliders through there way back in the day. And the site has pretty much been dormant for probably about like 8, 9 years at this point. But back then, when I first built this first time-lapse slider, I put out the wiring diagram, schematics, all the detailed information on the parts that need to be made, how to go about making them, where to source all the parts, the individual resistors, diodes, opto-isolators, so things like that. And then I even put together videos explaining step by step how to build one of these systems. And it was a time-lapse slider with all kinds of features, and it did all kinds of cool stuff. And I had the code online that you could download and load on the Arduino. But I never really got into the GitHub thing. I think that's people that are a little bit more savvy on programming than me. But that was pretty open source. But at this point, it's kind of old school. I don't think anybody's interested in that anymore.
That GitHub wasn't what I meant to say. It was one of the maker platforms where, you know, where folks have good ideas and share the plans and drawings and what have you. I'm just asking from a completely personal and selfish point of view. I'd love to build some of the stuff you made, but mine would just probably kill me.
A couple of the tools I use these days is I've got a printer that's capable of printing in polycarbonate, and that's a very tricky material to work with, and it's a pretty expensive printer. It's covered from a company called Qidi. That's QIDI. And the printer is called an iFast, and it's an absolute beast. It prints polycarb just amazing, which is good because a lot of the times the stuff that I use, it will apply forces that'll rip through most plastic.
Does it not also incorporate carbon fiber into the build?
You can, yep. There's a lot of carbon fiber infused filaments and things you can use. The filament I use the most for polycarbonate, though, is from a company called Polymakers called Polymax PC, which is about 4 times tougher than your average polycarbonate. It's probably arguably the toughest material that you can use for making things, which is important, especially making things move fast and quickly. You don't want anything that's going to rip apart. And then you're also going to have to get yourself a plasma CNC machine, too. The things I've been building these days are getting a little bit out of the range of what most do-it-yourselfers are going to be able to do unless they've got access to a pretty functional shop.
Yeah, no, I've got hand tools, basically. So I'm not a threat to you.
Hey, you can do a lot with hand tools, trust me.
I do a lot with it. Like I said earlier, it doesn't work. But yeah, I've got a lot of hand tools. Well, Chris, it's I think we're about out of time, and I really, really appreciate you taking the afternoon at the weekend to talk to me and to talk to my viewers. I know that people have been really anticipating this for some time. It's been great to have you on.
Well, you know, it's been an absolute privilege. I mean that. You know, when I first was talking to Mike, the interesting thing is he had mentioned who you were, that, you know, that he wanted to make this connection. And he mentioned your name. And I was like, I've been following this guy. In fact, when I was looking at getting into using microscopes, objectives for macro photography, I started going through and I found your videos. And I just immediately kind of stopped looking any further. You have this way of explaining things. You hold an expertise in this that is absolutely fantastic. And you have a way of teaching, and you have a way of explaining things and putting things in concepts into words that even someone like me can understand. And that's something I really appreciate. And also, they're entertaining too. You make them fun.
Well, thank you.
Gosh, I wasn't expecting that. That made my day. Well, I know that everybody is going to be a buzz about this, and I know that we'll be talking about this chat for a while to come. So thank you so much for giving us your time. Most appreciated.
Well, absolutely, and thank you for having me.
You bet. Take care. And thanks to you for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Take care and be safe. Goodbye.